To quote Jimmy Perry, Dad's Army was born out of desperation. I've been slogging away for 17 years, singing in musicals, doing years of weekly rep, and I'd got precisely nowhere. I'd played small parts in sitcoms on television, but no one seemed impressed. There was only one answer, to sit down and write a sitcom myself with a good part in it for me. I racked my brains, then it came to me, The Home Guard. On the next Sunday, by sheer chance, I saw Oh, Mr. Porter, the old Will Hay film, on television. That's it, I thought. That's the combination. Pompous man in charge, old man, and young boy.
And with that, words of Jimmy Perry, we are welcoming you to this next episode of The Best Television You Never Saw. I'm Greg Kozlik, along with Glenn Mitchell, who was reading Jimmy Perry there. And this episode is about Dad's Army, which is probably the most uniquely British of British shows, which may account for why it hasn't been very well known in the United States. It's all revolving around the Home Guard. And Glenn, could you kind of fill us in with a British perspective on what the Home Guard was?
Yes, the Home Guard was the official response to a genuine emergency. Great Britain, as of 1940, was in very serious danger of being invaded by Nazi Germany, and we needed every available man. And it was a male thing. And the idea was for what were originally called the local defense volunteers to be made up of men who were too old for conventional military service or were otherwise unavailable, to make up the numbers and to serve as a defense force, initially as lookouts, but eventually developed into the idea of them being a combat force. And if needs be, if it really did come to an invasion, retreat, into the hinterlands and act as a guerrilla force. But initially, it was a line of defense made up of men who were, for the most part, too old for the conventional military.
And so that's something that I don't think Americans can really appreciate, the actual sense of dire danger that was facing England in 1940.
Yeah, it was the darkest period of our history, really, certainly modern history. And it is difficult for, say, Americans to grasp this because of the sheer distance involved. America never really was in any imminent danger of invasion. There wasn't even the bombing because of the sheer distance. Whereas we were, was it 28 miles away from occupied France? It was really, really was on the doorstep. And as yet, there hadn't been any real test in combat, and we'd had the retreat from Dunkirk and so on, which, because we'd originally, as per the titles of the show, which more later, Britain started originally rather on the offensive and was just pushed back to its own shores. It was just us alone in Europe, and aside from the neutral countries, and it could have gone either way, it really could. And it wasn't until quite some time later that the tide eventually turned. I mean, the Home Guard itself was considered to be no longer necessary and was disbanded towards the end of 1944, so it didn't make it to the very end of the war. But by that time, it became fairly obvious that we were not in danger of invasion, so the Home Guard was no longer needed. But for most of the war, they were there.
Actually, I just thought of it. The closest thing that that comes to an analogy is in 1941, after Pearl Harbor, the West Coast felt that they were under threat of imminent invasion, which of course led to that Steven Spielberg film, 1941.
41, yeah.
Yeah, which was basically built up on hysteria that was very far-fetched and not realistic. Whereas in 1940, the British Isles were under great threat. So how is this seen as a setting or a premise for what is possibly one of the greatest British television shows ever?
Well, the wonderful thing about it is that because it was made up from men from all walks of life who really had to get on and cooperate, it presents a microcosm of British society and of its class system. Within that, there is ample humour for, ample opportunity for humour, I should say, based on the differences, the hierarchy, and, what the British are really made of. And of course, the best of the British, which is the determination and the willingness to fight to the death to defend our freedom. That's the plus side of it. The downside of it is that the class system, which was far stronger and more rigid in those days, wasn't very nice, and it tended to divide people. So what we've got here, say, a group of disparate individuals who are both divided and united. So you've got the opportunity for conflict, and then the natural humour that can arise out of all this.
And it's also one of the, I think it is in Steptoe and Son, the basic premise that seems to be in so many comedies of stasis, of people that are trapped.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
And they can't, they have no other choice but to get on.
Yeah. Yes, Harold Steptoe desperately wants to improve his lot in life, his station. He sees himself as having the potential to be more than a rag and bone man, but he's trapped. And within Dad's Army, the situation isn't as hopeless and as unhappy as all that, but they are really stuck where they are. And the stroke of genius here was to go against expectations as to who was to be the commanding officer and who was to be his second in command. Everybody expected the man-in-charge, the captain, to be a patrician type, because that's how it's always done. And the sergeant, his next one down, his NCO, would normally be working class, middle class at the top. I don't know how many people now would remember, say, the Army game one would have seen any of it, but you'd have the sergeant major type there who'd be William Hartnell or Bill Fraser, and he wouldn't be a posh man. He'd be sort of bark an order, get your figures out, about turn, and he wouldn't be posh, whereas the CO would be a more languid, posh individual. Yes, jolly good. Carry on, Sergeant. Dad's Army turns that around, because the man who, at the beginning of it all, really appoints himself as the commanding officer, he has no real authority to do so, is the local bank manager, George Mainwarring, who is stuck middle class. He's a grammar school boy. He was thwarted in the First World War because the time he got into it, no fault of his own, the fighting had just stopped. And as he said, having said he served there throughout 1919 and being reminded by his sergeant that surely the war was over by then, so, or somebody had to clean up the mess. But he alone in the platoon doesn't, apart from the boy Pike, of whom more later, doesn't have any medals because there was no opportunity. Sergeant Wilson is actually Mainwaring's second in command at the bank, but he is the upper class type. He is the one who has had the relatively easy, privileged life and aristocratic connections. He eventually does inherit a title, becomes the Honourable Arthur Wilson, much to Mainwaring's fury. He is the natural aristocrat, but his lot in life is to be stuck professionally as Mainwaring's number two. He's not going to go anywhere until Mainwaring goes, and he's not going anywhere. But in every other respect, Wilson is the social superior, and Mainwaring knows that. We're talking about public schools and the implied privilege in Mainwaring's view. And Mainwaring, who pointed this up? It might have been Bill Pertwee who played the warden, but Mainwaring's position is a relatively underexplored character in British humour and media, in that he is the middle-class man who actually has a sort of disdain for the working man, because he has a rather snobbish way with him. He wants to be, he aspires to higher things. But by the same token, he doesn't like the upper bracket either. He sees them as effete and ineffectual, and with the public school system, I think he actually does use the word depraved or depravity. The whole public school system reeks of depravity. And so he doesn't like the upper bracket, but he doesn't really like the lower orders either. So he actually is the middle-class dilemma of the British Isles. But yeah, I mean, the natural aristocrat, Sergeant Wilson, quite effortlessly and unwittingly upstages Mainwaring in every respect, socially and the way he conducts himself. And Mainwaring can't do anything about that, and it annoys him immensely. But he does take a little bit of pride in the fact that he's beaten the system to the point where he is the captain of the platoon, he is the bank manager, he has attained this position, but they still won't let him in the golf club.
Well, there is something about a bank manager. I mean, that was a very good choice to make that his profession.
Yeah. Yes.
It's just, as you said, the opening by Jimmy Perry. It's Oh, Mr. Porter. It's the character that Will Hay created. That someone who's really wishes he were more, but still disdains the people above him.
Yes, and has delusions of competence. Will Hay really is a totally incompetent, but he's bluffing it. He gets by and he's bluffing it. Mainwaring's bluffing it. When somebody points up an issue, a certain problem or something which Mainwaring hadn't, he rescues the situation by saying, I was wondering which of you would be the first to spot that. Because we hadn't. But that's very Will Hay. And the parallels between the two are enormous. And, of course, the parallels between Arthur Lowe's previous roles are strong. Captain Mainwaring is not a great deal different from Mr. Swindley, whom we'd portrayed previously. Arthur Lowe had been knocking around for years on stage and in films, and he's in Kind Hearts and Coronets at the end, very high profile film from 1949, I think. But he had become a national name in an ITV soap opera, which is still running, called
Coronation Street.
Coronation Street, yes, it's been going since 1960. It's incredible. And in the 60s, he was Mr. Swindley, Leonard Swindley, who ran the local drapers and was this pompous little man with ideas about his social standing and that sort of thing. And he proved to be such a popular character in Coronation Street that they gave him his own spin-off sitcom, Pardon the Expression, which I know you've seen.
Yes.
And this was still Granada Television, the Northern ITV company, did very well. And he was very largely identified as Swindley. I think his last throw of the dice as Swindley was in a subsequent series called Turn Out the Lights.
Yes, he did it with Robert Dorning.
Robert Dorning, yeah. And they were supposed to be psychic investigators, ghost hunters, that sort of thing.
Right.
And
which actually, if you see... I don't usually go in for, fright comedy where everyone's acting terrified and everything.
Do this.
But yeah, exactly. But there is an episode of Pardon the Expression with Robert Dorning where the two of them are in a haunted house or something. And it's actually funny. It's one of the few fright comedies that I ever found funny. So it's, I guess it was a natural for them to say, let's spin this off.
That's probably where it came from, yeah. And one of the writers on it, by the way, was Kenneth Cope before he played Martin Hoffler, the ghost detective.
Which we'll get to in future episodes.
Another episode. That's the second time we've done that.
Yeah. So stay tuned.
Yeah, but those exist, by the way, I should tell you. And it was considered a flop at the time, and I don't think any of those episodes still survive. So what we've got is what is from the Coronation Street archive, which I think is everything. And at least one season, I forget how many now, of Pardon the Expression. So that's what we've got of Leonard Swindley. But BBC didn't originally want him because we're talking about class structure again here. It's funny how it was there in real life, in everyday life, I should say, but it was also there at the BBC because there was a definite sense of who were considered to be our people and who were considered to be ITV's people. The rather vulgar commercial rivals.
So it was like it was as if Arthur Wilson was the chairman of the BBC.
It's a bit like that.
Actually.
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't really a snob, Arthur Wilson. He wouldn't be a good example because he got on with everybody and he didn't look down at the lower classes. I hate to use the term, but that seemed to be.
But it was more of the greengrocer character Hodges, the air raid warden. He was the ITV type.
Yeah, actually, you've got it. a key point. The big comic solo comic names, or the comedian names on BBC. Tony Hancock, who did go to ITV, and people were not happy about that, but he was really the Beebs man. Harry Worth, to some degree, inherited the gap that Hancock had left. And these were the Beebs. We can be talking middle class types, really. Well, Hancock would have hated by saying that. But it was certainly a middle class appeal. Over on ITV, you had somebody like Arthur Haynes, whose strong point was a belligerent tramp who was, who pretended to be had certain airs about him, but he was essentially a rough Cockney tramp and aggressive. There was an aggression, I think, in ITV comedy that wasn't so prevalent at the BBC. I think it was considered a very down market place to be among the BBC types. David Croft, producer, co-writer, had actually been headhunted from an ITV company. He'd been with TNT's, one of the earlier ITV franchises, and not the earliest by any means. About 59 they started, but he had been headhunted by the BBC, but he was by then a BBC man. Arthur Lowe was not wanted because one of the execs said something about who's he again? He's with Granada, isn't he? I don't think we really want him. And they had to push there. They wanted Arthur Lowe, and they got him. But there was BBC resistance to what was seen to be an established name from the other side. Mm-hmm. And it was a pecking order. It was a social pecking order.
So, so what happens was Jimmy Perry, jobbing actor, looking for looking for advancement, comes up with this idea.
Yeah, a scriptwriter too, of course.
Right, and he takes it to David Croft, who actually is Jimmy Perry's agent, was married to David Croft, and he had worked with him a little bit. And I think he approached him in the car park and said, "I have this idea," and David Croft immediately liked it, and they set to work about it. The interesting thing was the original title that they had was The Fighting Tigers, if you know anything about World War II, the Fighting Tigers were an Air Force unit in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, they were Americans who got into World War II before Pearl Harbor, unless I'm mistaken. They decided to fight on the side of the Chinese against the Japanese.
Yeah, and if you saw their planes, they had the teeth painted on the front of the plane, so it looked like it was actually coming to bite you or something. Yeah. But, so anyway, so they had this title, The Fighting Tigers, and fortunately, I think it was Michael Mills at the BBC. It was the head of Light Entertainment. Said
he commissioned it, and well, I'll let you say it.
Said, now look, why don't we call it Dad's Army? Which actually is, you couldn't do better.
That sums it up perfectly.
Because I'm sorry, it really explains the situation, especially for people in Great Britain at the time who knew of the Home Guard, that it's an army, but it's made up of the old men.
Yeah. And it contains with it a measure of humorous disdain. Yeah. It's affectionate, but there is something slightly disdainful about it. Oh, Dad's Army, dismissive. No, these are the old boys, they're past it. And of course, an awful lot of it is suggesting that, well, maybe they are, but maybe they're not. These are men with grit. And not least the intrepid Corporal Jones, of course, who will try, he's up for anything, climbing up anything, braving. He's the man who tried to retrieve a bomb from up in the telephone wires.
Yeah, volunteer for anything.
Anything. Permission to volunteer, sir.
Permission to volunteer. So so going back to the idea of old Mr. Porter, you have the pompous man, which of course was Captain Mainwarring.
Yep.
The old man, which, as we just introduced, was Corporal Jack Jones.
Jack Jones. And guess where he had been before?
Bootsy and ITV, Bootsy and
ITV,
Snudge.
playing Old Johnson, the retainer, who wasn't a lot different from Corporal Jones.
No. And if you think about when he was doing Bootsy and Snudge as Old Johnson, he was probably started it in his mid to early 30s.
Yeah, he was only in his 30s, and he'd been playing old men when he was a POW in his 20s. Yeah, he had a very unfortunate war, Clive Dunn, and was in captivity for rather too long. And they were doing shows to amuse each other, and he was playing old men then. But certainly by the time of Bootsy and Snudge in the early 60s, this was a 30-something who was used to coming across like a 70-something.
Yeah, he was in the Hancock, the reunion,
Yep.
the Army reunion party.
Reunion party and some other episodes. Yeah, he wasn't looking as old in that, but yeah, he didn't play exclusively old, but he was certainly known for being adept at it. The guy they first wanted was Jack Haig.
Jack Haig, right?
The first choice, and he went way back. Where did he come from? I have to say, he came from Streatham, and to quote W.C. Fields, after the fashion of all eminent men. Not that I'm saying where I'm from, but yeah, he was a variety comedian he was a BBC man, but he had been on a kids show. We're back to Tyne Tees again, around the time that David Croft would have been there. He had a kids show playing a character called Wacky Jackie in his own series, and he revived that actually at the Beat in the late 60s. Singer Roger Whittaker had a children's show called Whistle Stop, and he had Jack Haig in there as comic relief, and he was doing funny business to amuse the youngsters. Well, I remember Whittaker always used to refer to him not as Wacky Jackie, but as Jackie Wacky. I think he hadn't quite got it, But I remember Jack Haig doing sketches in those shows. I think that's the first time I was really conscious of him properly, because he had been in Hugh and I, which is David Croft again. He was playing a neighbour known as Old Wormold, Mr. Wormold. So again, he had a track record with David Croft, and he was the first choice to play the old man. But in the end, it wasn't him. And it was offered. The part was offered to Clive Dunn at the same time as they approached John Le Mesurier. But I'm getting slightly ahead here, I think. But no.
And so they went to Clive Dunn, and Clive Dunn was reluctant to do it, but would only do it when he found out that John Le Mesurier was considering playing Sergeant Wilson.
Yes, because they were old friends, and they were kind of acting as a kind of a mutual stalling, because they were saying to each other, "I'll do it if you do it. No, I'll do it if you do it." And if we wait a bit, maybe the money will improve, because of course the money for this telly show was not going to be great. BBC, the old joke about the BBC suit, small checks. And they were hoping that, because John Le Mesurier was used to far better money from filmmaking. He was an incredibly prolific film actor, where the money was far better. But he was interested in doing this, but hoped the money might have been a little more generous. But it was between him and Clive Dunn comparing notes, and eventually they each said they would do it. I think they managed to convince each other.
And one interesting thing is that before Clive Dunn had agreed, they had offered it to someone else who went on to become quite famous in his own right, and was also at the time known for playing old men.
Yeah,
who is actually even younger than Clive Dunn.
Yes, David Jason.
David Jason, who went on to, well, he was in playing old men in Harket Barker.
Yeah, and Porridge.
And Porridge, right?
Yeah, he did have a little sort of niche there, playing old men. So with Ronnie Barker, he was this ancient gardener, as I remember, and I can't think of the name now. But yeah, he was playing old men. This is quite interesting, because I was aware of him really looking young and old at the time, because he was in Do Not Adjust Your Set.
Yes.
ITV's rediffusion and later the early days of Thames, where he was appearing as a young man. But at the same time, he was getting known for things like the Ronnie Barker shows, playing ancients. So I was seeing both versions of him at the time. Not that that's of any great relevance, but yeah, he did have a bit of a niche there. So it was nearly David Jason, but I think one of the deciding factors there was that they felt it would take far too long in makeup for each episode to age him sufficiently for the role of Jones. Whereas with Clive Dunn, he really didn't need so much. He did actually have a head start in terms of how he looked.
And they did need a younger man to play old, given the sort of roles and antics that they wrote for the character.
He couldn't be a real old man because he just couldn't have done that stuff. Arnold Ridley couldn't have done it. John Laurie couldn't have done it. The nearest parallel I can give you here is Laurel and Hardy, Babes in Toyland. Henry Brandon playing the villain, old Barnaby. He was only 20, but he was made up to look old. And apparently he actually gained the disapproval of a lot of older actors when he played that role because they felt that these genuine old actors had been done out of a part by a young man. But as he said, they couldn't have done it. The sort of things that Barnaby has to do in the film, a genuinely old man could not do.
Right.
And it was the same thing with Clive Dunn as Corporal Jones.
So they had, so you have your pompous man, your old man, and your young boy.
The young boy who was Jimmy Perry, really.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Jimmy Perry based the character on himself, and in fact, the catchphrase, and we'll go over the catchphrases because it seems every character has one, at least one in this series. But they're not really forced. They did develop naturally, or they fit naturally from the start. So it didn't seem like it was it was something that was forced. But
sense of contrivance about them. That's the key thing.
Exactly. The catchphrase that Mainwarring uses all the time when referring to Pike is he gives him this withering look and says, "You stupid boy."
Stupid boy, which is what Jimmy Perry's father had said to him when he said he wants to be a comedian. Instead of something more reliable, solid, you stupid boy.
And in fact, that's the title of Jimmy Perry's autobiography.
Perhaps. I haven't seen that, by the way.
Oh, it's quite good. It's quite good. But so anyway, so Jimmy Perry was a member of the Home Guard. Like the character of the young boy who's Private Pike.
Yeah, waiting to be picked up. Yeah. Because that was the other end of the Home Guard. There were men who were too old, or those who were, teenagers waiting to be called up into the regular services. So you had
and Private Pike's character is he is a mama's boy. He shows up on parade with a scarf around his neck because his mother says she doesn't want him to get a chest or something like that.
Yes, and she goes on at Mainwarring about making a boy do all these things and insisting he has got, and he's done his chest and everything else.
So you've got that. So you've got those three, and of course you had, as we discussed, Sergeant Wilson. Now, originally they thought that Arthur Lowe was going to play the sergeant. The people reading it, the powers that be at the BBC said, "Oh, Arthur Lowe will be the sergeant, and John LeMessurier will be the captain." No, that's the other way around.
Yeah,
which, as you pointed out, it's the genius of the show.
Yes, oh yes, it just confounded all expectations, and it gave them this wonderful inbuilt conflict between the two, this rivalry that drove it to a very large degree. If it had been the other way around, it would have been far too comfortable. There would have been far less point. Whereas, Mainwarring is constantly fighting against his immediate subordinate,
and whenever possible, pulls rank on him.
Oh yes,
at the bank or
in uniform. Yes,
or in uniform.
Yes, remind me, you've got 3 pips up here.
Yeah. So the other thing is that so you've got that wonderful dynamic going. The other thing that Jimmy Perry he's brought a lot of himself into this. He was in the Home Guard. he was the stupid boy, but then he also wrote a part for himself.
He wanted to play Walker,
Yeah.
the Spiv.
Now tell people what a Spiv is.
The Spiv, yes, a familiar figure in those days. Comedian Arthur English made a regular act out of it. He played a Spiv on stage. His bill matter was the Prince of the Wide Boys, and this was about who operated not quite within the law and came into his own during the war years when things were rationed and otherwise in short supply. Whatever it was, he could get it. And the general understanding was that where he got it was not necessarily by legal means, but he didn't ask. But, he wanted a big thing with Walker, knicker elastic, of course. The ladies constantly imperiled by the lack of knicker elastic.
Yeah, don't want them falling down on the job.
That's it. And their near neighbours, of course, the nylons, which were again in short supply during the war, nigh impossible to get. But things like food, for example, or coupons, which you needed coupons in order to buy things. The Spiv could get you extra coupons, and because everything was rationed. If there's something in short supply, the Spiv could get it, and they were, as James Beck, who played Walker, pointed out, he knew some of them, and he actually said that really these were not necessarily nice guys to know, because Walker needed something of a redeeming feature. And with Walker, yes, he might be a crook, he might be a fairly ruthless crook in many ways, but to his friends, he's loyal. He won't try and cheat his friends, and he'll do everything he can to help them. You need something, I can get you that, that sort of thing. He manages to obtain a couple of hard to find cricket balls, for example, when needed, that sort of thing. Okay, got to pay for them, but he will get them, and he won't, as I said, he won't cheat his friends. He's good to them. And he was, I guess, the acceptable face of the Spiv, characterized, incidentally, usually by one of those sort of pencil moustaches, and the look of a wannabe American gangster. There'd be the wide striped suit and
fedora,
yeah. And all this sort of thing. Two-tone shoes, correspondent shoes, as they were known. And I don't think we need to explain that at this point. And he was generally, operating on the fringes of legality, shall we say. But with Walker, for the platoon's point of view, he was a useful man to have around, and also very loyal. Even if he didn't join up deliberately, as I recall, when the recruiting was going on, he wasn't there to join up, and he finished up being in it by accident. It wasn't his intention, but he finished up in the platoon anyway. And but he was a loyal, and that's really what I can say about the Spiv. As a type, they really died out of the post-war era. The best example, actually, of a post-war Spiv in mainstream British entertainment was in the St. Trinian's films. George Cole as Flash Harry. He's a Spiv.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's actually a somewhat belated Spiv. And by the time he was doing it in the last of the original films in the mid-60s, it was an anachronism. But everybody still knew the type, so it worked. But the best remembered Spiv now in popular culture is Private Walker, Joe Walker from Dad's Army.
So, and Jimmy Perry wanted to play that part. He wrote the part for himself, and they wisely said, well, look, you can either play the part or you can write it, and it's much better if you wrote it.
Yeah, because there was a certain division that needed to be maintained, kind of us and them, between the production end of it and the acting end of it, because they felt that if one of the writers was also in the cast, there was a risk of the remaining cast thinking that he was going to give himself all the best lines. So there'd be an instant sort of rivalry going on there. Whereas detaching it in that way worked far better. And in the end, I believe Jimmy Perry thought that James Beck did a better job of it than he would have done. And Perry did get into it, though. He wrote himself the part of a variety comic in one of the first series episodes.
Yes, he played Charlie Cheeseman.
Charlie Cheeseman. And it's a slight memory block. Is that the same one that Barbara Windsor is in, Shooting Pains?
Yes.
I thought so, yeah. That's it. Yeah. So yes, he did get into it, but just that once, I think.
Yeah. And seeing him in that, I'm glad that he wrote it and James Beck played played Walker.
I think so. I think, if anything, it's evidence of a narrow escape. He would have been rather over the top as Walker, I think.
Yeah. So the next character, of course, is James Fraser, the Scotsman.
Ah, yes. We're doomed. Yeah, John Laurie, who was a marvelous actor, a serious, straight actor, Shakespearean actor,
Yeah.
much acclaimed in his day, very aware of the fact that he was good. This was not a man for false modesty, it has to be said. And in so many ways, the archetypal Scot, he had the look, the face. He was from Dumfries, I think, and he was that craggy Scot, but as a younger man, his range was broader because he wasn't quite as craggy looking. But he was a serious actor and one of great distinction. Had a theatre and film career that went way back. He went back to Hitchcock in the 30s. He's in the 39 Steps. I think he was working with Hitchcock as early as 1930. Well, and of course, you mentioned Will Hay. He turns up with Will Hay in The Ghost of St. Michael, I think it is.
Yeah, there's a story that I forget who was asking him, but giving his experience as a Shakespearean actor, and of course he knew all the greats of his age, Gielgud and Olivier and everything, and all those. And somebody asked him, "Well, who was the greatest Hamlet?" And he said, "I was, laddie."
Yes, and the thing is, he would have meant it,
and he meant it. Yeah,
he really did. And in a way, you need that level of self-confidence if you're going to make it. But perhaps a measure of tempering would have been pleasant.
Well, it was interesting because after Dad's Army had finished, he was doing a one-man show where
the Old Boy Network.
Yeah, he was reviewing his career, and he said, I played Hamlet here, I did this, I played Macbeth there, and I'm going to be remembered for this crap, meaning Dad's Army.
Yeah, he'd said that to Jimmy Perry at the time, I think. Yeah. And it's when the show was just taking off. And he had this thing where he would be disdainful about a project and was convinced it was going to fail and would say so. And then when it turned out to be a hit, he would do a complete about face. He was saying at the beginning of Dad's Army, "Oh, this is rubbish. They'll catch on. It's a disaster. And of course, once it became a popular, he actually turned to Perry Croft and said, "Of course, I knew it would succeed." I had every confidence in it. And of course, they started to write that into the show. Yeah, Mainwarring.
They put that character. They put that characteristic because he's always saying. In fact, they did a TV film about the history of Dad's Army with a reenactment of it all, and they called it "We're Doomed."
Yes.
Yeah. And because that was what he would always say. He was, "We're doomed. We're doomed."
Yeah, but they say, but if Mainwarring had a bad idea, what he thought was a bad idea, he would say so. Or no, succeed, it'd be a disaster. And of course, when it worked, he'd say, "Oh, I had every confidence in you."
I never doubted you.
Never doubted you. And the other one was when Godfrey was revealed to have been a conscientious objector in the First War. And of course, most of them are condemning him, but Walker doesn't. Incidentally, he's sympathetic. It's quite interesting. But one of the sternest voices against Godfrey is Fraser. And of course, once it turns out that yes, he was a conscientious objector, but he was in the thick of it as a stretcher bearer, and was unarmed in no man's land, and was decorated for gallantry for rescuing comrade. Suddenly, he wasn't considered a coward after all. And Fraser does his usual about face and said, "Oh, I forget the exact words, but again, it's like, oh, I never doubted you for a moment." Having condemned him out of hand.
There's another episode where Godfrey falls asleep because he's taking sleeping pills, and Fraser insists that he be shot for falling asleep on duty. Yes. Which brings us to the last of the so-called Magnificent Seven, which is Charles Godfrey.
Charles Godfrey, the wonderful Arnold Ridley, actor and playwright. Mm-hmm. The latter of which tended to be forgotten. People remind us of the fact that He was an actor who went way back, but as a playwright, went back to the 20s. He wrote 30 plays, I think. And the only one they ever talked about, to his slight irritation, was The Ghost Train.
The Ghost Train.
Which, of course, we know people who are interested in our sort of thing tend to know for the 1940s, is it 41 film with Arthur Askey and Dickie Murdoch.
Right.
And
but of course, the Ghost Train is, in many respects, the plot of Oh, Mr. Porter.
It is, yes, it is. Yeah, so we are back to Bill Hague, the Bill Hague connection again, yeah. It had already been filmed. It was filmed in 1931. And that version only exists in truncated form because apparently they cannibalized the negative for the Arthur Askey remake.
Well, the other thing is that if you go on to Arthur Askey's career 2 years on or 3 years on, they basically rewrote the plot for Backroom Boy.
Oh boy!
Which the same idea of it's something mysterious, something ghostly. They can't explain it, but it turns out to be smugglers.
Yeah.
Which instead of putting it in a train station, they put it in a lighthouse. He wrote a good plot there.
Oh yes, it was durable. It's still played around the world by amateur companies, and the sad thing about that is that he had to forfeit the amateur rights to it. He could have made a fortune, but he had his own film company in the 30s, and it eventually went bust, and insisted on paying off everybody who needed to be paid off, and in fact he went broke himself doing it, and finances he had to sell the amateur performance rights for The Ghost Train for just a couple of £100 or something like that, which he at the time was grateful for, but it lost him a fortune. But it does show that he was a man of great integrity, insisted on honouring the debts and impoverish himself in the process, frankly, and do himself out of a lot of future income. But it shows that it tells us an awful lot about Arnold Ridley's integrity. And there's so much more to him. People think he was just this gentle, harmless old man in Dad's Army, Charles Godfrey, who spent his life in retail, Army and Navy. When Mainwarring first hears that he spent years in the Army and Navy, he said Army and Navy, thinking this was a man of extensive military experience. He meant the stores of that name. He was a shop assistant, but he was this gentleman who lived with his two sisters, or two of his sisters. There was a third one who was married, but this was a man of tea and cakes. And Arnold Ridley was quite different. He was a very strong, determined man who'd fought in both world wars, was badly wounded in both world wars, and was invalided out of them both. But despite having suffered so terribly in the first war, still volunteered for the second, and actually was reprimanded once he got wounded again for not telling them about his previous injuries. This is a grateful nation, huh? But no, the long-term effects of his first war experience, he finished up with a paralyzed right arm. The nerve in it had died, and they had to do a nerve graft, give him some function back, which thankfully did work. But he'd also been hit in the head with a German rifle butt and was prone to periodic blackouts for the rest of his life. This was a man who'd really been through it. And there were some other things in his first war service which left their mark, and I'm not going to go into now. But, he was not Private Godfrey at all, but he played him superbly.
He did.
A man of great sensitivity and strength.
Except in the area of his bladder.
Oh, yes. Godfrey, bless him, was, I'm afraid, the victim of a constant need to be excused.
Yes. May I be excused, because he was...
You think with that many older men in the platoon, it might have been more of an issue in general, but no, it just seemed to have been Godfrey, unfortunately. So I blame the upside down cakes myself.
So there you have you had the two men, or actually three men still, I guess, in their middle age. Three older men who were definitely in their 70s at the time.
Can I just stop?
And the boy.
I just want to say that the two oldest were Arnold Ridley and John Laurie, born 1896 and 97 respectively. And there was a certain amount of rivalry and enmity on the part of John Laurie about about who being the oldest member of the cast, but also the fact that John Laurie felt that Arnold Ridley was, a bit too past it and a bit, a bit of a burden, which he wasn't. But there was a definite rivalry there between the two. But yes, I'm sorry, I leapt in with the digression. Yes, you had those two, and the youngest, Private Pike, who was played by Ian Lavender.
Yeah, who just passed away last year.
Yes, yes, very recently.
Sadly.
Yeah, and he again, it was David Croft. He'd been in a one-off TV thing for Croft shortly beforehand, and I think he didn't get dumped in the deep end rather. He'd been signed up to play more of a subsidiary character, and somebody dropped out and he'd had to play the lead, take over the lead or something. Was that right? Or am I thinking of something else?
Not sure.
Okay, I'm not sure about that. Let's cut that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. But again, played by Ian Lavender, who had again recently worked for David Croft. So I think we've got an edit point there, haven't we?
So when they first started the series, okay, it actually begins with the formation of the local defense volunteers. They're Mainwaring's in the bank, and they're listening to Anthony Eden deliver his appeal that all able-bodied men will join the local defense volunteers, and Mainwaring takes it upon himself to become the captain. He appoints himself captain, and they meet at the local church hall, and that's where you're introduced to all the characters.
Well, almost, because of course that first episode begins 3 times.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yep. Yeah. The actual opening is of a reunion of the platoon in the then present day, 1968. And of course, as they start to talk, it gets into reminiscence, and we go into flashback. Intro number 2 was a motif they only used in the first series. They did a fake newsreel, a pastiche newsreel, supposedly showing the Home Guard in action and all these rather ramshackle things they were doing, these rather peculiar things, all presented very heroically. Intro number 3 proper is when we get the beginnings of the platoon, the response to the call from Anthony, and we have the meeting and so on. So there's 3 intros, and I'd always wondered during the whole run of the show whether, when it came to the final episode, they would go back to that reunion, bring it full circle, and then come out on that. And they didn't. And it was only subsequently I discovered the probable reason why, which apart from the fact that I thought they might forget about it, I think they will have done. But apparently they didn't want that reunion intro in the first place. This was something the BBC had them do to give a context to this period set comedy for a modern audience, because they felt that otherwise viewers wouldn't necessarily immediately relate to it. Bring a modern audience in via a present day reunion. That's why they did it. So instead of that, it comes out with them still in their wartime milieu. So they remain there in the public imagination, still in that setting. They never came out of it. And I think that was a wise decision.
And actually, David Croft wanted to open it with actual newsreel footage of Nazi tanks and refugees and things and houses being bombed, and that was a pretty grim opening.
Yeah, it wouldn't have sat well. It would not exactly set up the mood terribly well.
Well, and wasn't it true that there were a lot of people at the BBC that said, well, we're not far enough removed that we can make fun of this thing.
It's true, but again, it's very easy to forget how soon, in relative terms, it was after the war. It was 23 years after the war ended, and let's say we're looking at 2002 now. Let's say if you'd been in a very, very bloody conflict in 2002, would you feel a little sensitive about it?
It'd be akin to doing a comedy about the people rescuing the 9/11 victims.
Bit like that, yeah. In terms of the time frame, certainly.
Yeah.
It was still very fresh. It was still a very raw nerve. Kids on the streets were still playing World War II games. God knows I was.
I was.
Yeah. Okay, it was maybe slightly different for me because my parents, I were slightly older parents, and they'd been in it. An awful lot of kids at that time had post-war adult parents, you know. Um, but no, it didn't stop them because the kids' comics were full of World War II stories, and it was common currency in the playground still. So you know, it was still a fresh memory, particularly in this country where we had been so seriously imperiled.
Well,
Um,
if you see television shows in the 60s shot in London, and you'll still see bombed out, cleared bomb sites.
oh my God, how many bomb sites were still around when I was a young adult, never mind when I was a kid. I
Yeah.
remember working in the city in the late 70s, City of London, at the end of the 70s. There were still big holes. Um, I remember there's one gaping gap still near London Wall, Moorgate Way. Long since all rebuilt, but you know, an awful lot of places. When I was a kid, just a matter of yards away to the right of where I was, just across the road, there was a gap where two houses used to be, and they didn't rebuild there until about 1970. They managed to squeeze three houses in where there had been two, which tells you a lot about how these things worked.
Yeah.
And in the opposite direction, a couple of streets away, there was a whole large block where it was still prefabs. These were these temporary houses, single story structures that they built to solve an immediate housing problem for people who'd been bombed out of their homes. And these were not intended to last very long, but they proved to be surprisingly durable and popular. The prefabs were still there, say, until about 1970. And a few blocks further away, there was another huge area of prefabs, which dissipated around the same time. They finally rebuilt in those places then. But if you were looking at the British scene in the 1960s when Dad's Army began, still plenty of bomb sites, plenty of prefabs. The reminders were all around you.
The other thing that struck me about the opening, of course, the what became the standard opening of the show was an animated uh, a arrow of a British thing in France and being driven back by the Nazi arrows and getting shoved back across the channel,
Yeah, and so
which,
making these pointless, defiant gestures, shoving in and
yes, kind
out.
of keep prodding at it, even though it can't touch it now.
Yeah,
But the first time it was shown, the audience laughed at that,
it did.
which
Yeah,
I find rather odd.
it's the British sense of humour, I'm afraid. There we
Yeah.
were, very confident, making all these bold advances and being ignominiously pushed back to where we'd started from into this position, this seemingly ineffectual position. I'm afraid we were laughing at our own failure. We are good at laughing at our own failures. Um, a lot of them are sitcoms, funnily enough, failed sitcoms that still get laughs.
Yeah.
Jimmy Perry wrote one or two of them. Oh God, I remember one he wrote before Dad's Army, called was it called Mum's Boys, which no longer exists. I'm happy to say that was a pickle for Irene Handel, and it was one of the worst things I'd ever seen on TV. It really was.
Yeah.
But his fortunes changed as a scriptwriter with Dad's Army. But I digress once more.
Well, the other thing that was interesting is that so they shot the pilot and they brought it into a test audience of 100 people, and the test audience just tore it to shreds. I think there was only one person that said I quite liked it, but everybody else was like, "It's too early, it's too soon to bring this up," or "Who wants to talk about the war anymore? Haven't we had enough of that?" Which really, if you think about it, in the 50s and 60s, there were so many war films.
There were, and it was dealt with in comedy. I do not know how many episodes of The Goon Show on the radio in the 50s went back to the war. A lot, because that was mostly driven by Spike Milligan, who got blown up in that war. You know? It was quite ubiquitous, really, and serious programs quite frequently. There was an ongoing thing that Granada TV did, introduced by a guy called Brian Inglis, called All Our Yesterdays, which is a weekly series based upon the news of 25 years ago this week. And at that time, that was all about the war. And that was a regular program. So there was a lot on TV about the war. wasn't necessarily comedy. Perhaps that's the difference. They thought it was too raw a nerve to be laughing at it.
So,
I don't know.
but what David Croft wisely did was to take that report and shove it in his desk and not let the powers that be see it until the series. Excuse me, until the series actually went out.
Yeah,
and so you recall that?
I do. I remember seeing the first one. Yeah. And I saw them all on the first transmission, I think, and most of the original repeats, yes. Of course, we've discussed this before as regards favourite episodes and lost episodes, which in my case happen to be one and the same. But no, I saw them all the time, and I thought it was good. But I had the perspective of being a 9-year-old kid, so and I say that half jokingly, but of course, again, we've discussed this previously. It did prove to be a surprising hit with youngsters. They like to see these adults being so silly.
Well, and as I pointed out in my book,
Yes,
I likened it to Laurel and Hardy in ensemble cast.
Yes, actually,
because they do play it so seriously, because it is a very serious topic. Like you said, the nation's back was against the wall, and one person in the Times in 1974 wrote, "What makes Dad's Army funny is the simple fact that Hitler was so very, very serious."
Yes, yes. And by the way, Dad's Army does make a lot of serious points. They do often pause to talk about the sheer heroism of certain characters and the nature of the British, how they're prepared to fight, stand together, and they wouldn't give up without a fight. There are plenty of straight, serious references in it amid all the absurdity and the silliness. And you say 1974. By that time, of course, the press had come around. Initially, they were cool. The first series, I think possibly series 2 to some degree, they drew praise from some quarters, but not others. Some of them thought it wasn't much, wouldn't necessarily sustain.
And then also another quote from the Times is, "There is a wider lunacy beyond the script. In fact, the fact that Clive Dunn might, in theory at least, have been the only thing standing between us and Dachau."
Yeah.
But as you said, it did become popular, and I think that this is the point that we should probably pause. And even although we won't pause, we'll pause and split this into a second episode where we can discuss the actual shows themselves and why people should watch them. So thank you for joining us, and we'll be back. For us, we'll be back in moments, seconds.
Do you think that's wise?
Oh, no.
Getting into the realms of fantasy there.
You're getting into the realms of fantasy there. Okay.